This morning, in our Justice Thursday conversation, we will be looking at the enhancing access to justice in addressing GBV, but more importantly, we're looking critically at the role of women judges, magistrates in championing jurisprudence on gender-based violence. And joining us in the studio this morning, Honourable Lady Justice Hellen Omondi is the judge of the Appeal Court and the president of the International Association of Women Judges. Good morning, and karibu sana. Thank you. Also joining us this morning is Honourable Renee Kitagwa, who is the Principal Magistrate at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport Law Courts, at the JKIA Law Courts. Good morning, Justice.
Good morning to you.
Karibu sana. Thank you both for joining us today on the Justice Thursday conversation. It started a while ago when we look at issues pertaining to justice, and we're looking at accessing justice and really understanding and breaking down some of these things for us to then be able to understand them at that level. Interestingly enough, our guest host for this morning swims in the same waters and she's a member of the ICJ, and Julie Matheka is our guest host for today. And as we look into those matters and jump into it, CT has a proverb that he shares with us every week. It comes from a different country, and we are in a democratic country this week with our proverbs, and he'll let us know who that is.
Yes. Last week we were in the Republic of Congo, not to be confused with the DRC. This week we are looking at proverbs from DRC, which is actually next door. If there had been no Berlin Conference and this redrawing of boundaries had existed, it was just simply one country. Well, I guess you could say it was just one continent, but then here we are. The proverb for the day, today is Thursday. You inherit from the dead, not the sick. That proverb is from DRC. I didn't invent it. You're looking at me as though it's like, why are you telling us these things? No, I am merely reading.
But that is true,
isn't it? Tell us what
even legally speaking, you can only inherit from somebody who is dead. That's why we do succession.
Indeed.
But for somebody who is sick, he's still alive. There's nothing that can pass. No property can pass from a sick person unless he bequeaths, he gives you like as a gift. Yes.
Interesting, looking at it from a legal point of view. Justice Omondi, what does that mean to you?
Well, I looked at City a bit puzzled as to why he would think of...
He can be a puzzling fella sometimes.
Yes, he really can be. But yes, indeed, you can only inherit from the dead. The one who is sick may only be sick, again, depending on the nature of illness, but they are still alive and have rights over what they own, and can still speak and say yes and no. The dead, the dead don't speak, so one can be able to stake a claim and hope to fight over it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Indeed. Okay, well, I think that will actually play out a little bit as we have this conversation this morning, and looking at some of the things that we are talking about as we kick off into it. The role of women judges, it almost, just from that first part alone, it almost were to say that the role could be different from other judges when it comes to looking at matters of gender-based violence in the country. Is that the case? And where are we starting off? We'll start off with you, Honourable Omondi. Is that what we're seeing? That the role of women judges could be specifically different when it comes to adjudication in gender-based violence issues, matters?
Thank you very much. The role of women judges is not totally different, but we have the tendency to look at matters with a gender lens, specifically because of what women and girls go through, and children. Our training as judicial officers, as lawyers, is one. Yet the lived reality, which we cannot run away from, is that the society has a tendency of looking at individuals from a gender lens, so that I am defined by my sex, female or male. And a lot of things that would happen would be attributed to the fact that I'm either male or female.
Yeah.
And that then leads to a lot of abuses. And because of the vulnerability of the female gender, there is the tendency to sort of sweep under the carpet what would otherwise be seen as being unfair and unjust. So yes, to that extent, we tend to have that lens because of the experiences that we go through and acknowledge.
Honorable Kitagwa, does it then affect how adjudication would then be played out? Because the almost initial reaction would be, well, this person who sits in a position as a judicial officer would lean in a particular way because of the fact that their gender naturally disposes them to feel a certain way. Would it then affect the way judgment happens?
Thank you for that question. I don't think that I would say you lean. You know, the nature of our training is that you need to balance. You need to understand that when you're sitting there as a judicial officer, you have to balance the rights of both parties. However, as a woman, you appreciate the role of a woman in the society, the challenges that women go through. So it's easier for you to relate with the issues and provide a conducive environment for a victim of gender violence in the circumstance. So that provides you with the ability to appreciate and understand this person better because of the gender role. You know, we've grown up in a stereotype society where women have been handled in a certain way. And being an African child, we understand, we know. When Ando speaks and says, this is what I've gone through, it's easier for me to relate. So I will look at it with that lens, provide that warmth, provide that environment that will allow the victim, because in most cases, these are victims of gender-based violence. Thank you.
You know, when you talk about gender-based violence, I sometimes wonder, the focus seems to be on the action that is described as violence, the verb. But what about the thinking that actually leads to it? What is it that makes people behave and conduct themselves in a certain way? What is this inclination? Because for it to be a subject that is constantly discussed, it's an issue that is out in the open, and it's something that is worrying. It's a trend that in many, many ways, it has a growth trajectory. What is it that brings us to this position where it is as worrisome as it is?
Thank you for that question. The issue of gender-based violence, it's a worrisome issue. And to answer that question, allow me to give my experience, because I've served in Kibera law courts for quite a number of years, about 7 years, and appreciating that environment. We've encountered various forms of gender-based violence. And in terms of what causes that, sometimes you may not really understand, but because things happen, and when people appear before you, somebody will say, okay, I was going out to line up my clothes, and I took some time outside. And when mostly is the husband or the boyfriend for some reason, calls the wife back, and he asked the wife, how come you've taken so long outside? Were you talking to some other man, or what were you doing? And issues escalate. So the causes are quite varied. So I cannot really say this is what causes gender violence, but it happens every single day. Every single day.
Allow me to go back to the earlier point that was being discussed around women understanding women's issues slightly better. Last year's data from CRU indicated that 711 men were actually victims of gender-based violence as well, sexual and gender-based violence. And I note that in the SGBV strategy that was launched by the Honorable the Chief Justice, Trauma Responsive Justice, that there was a concern that was raised in one of the conversations and consultations that if we have more women addressing GBV, then the men who are actually victims and survivors of GBV may not feel comfortable coming to the courts. Maybe shed light on that.
Thank you very much. We recognize that when you talk about SGBV and GBV, the majority of the survivors or the victims may be women. But it is a fact that men and boys also go through that kind of violence. Yeah. Acknowledging that, the female judicial officers within the International Association of Women Judges, the Kenyan chapter, recognize that we need to rope in the men so that our membership actually has women and men. The he for she, brother for sister approach. Yeah. And we have 16 male champions. 6 are judges and 10 are magistrates and Kadi. So yes, we acknowledge that it is not only something that affects women only. Perhaps the socialization is such that men tend to keep it under wraps, be man and not, don't talk about it. Women tend to voice it out. Actually, our mantra is justice and equality for all. So we acknowledge that, and we would want to see a society where it is violence-free, irrespective of which gender.
Right.
Yes.
Maybe just to add on to that, I think you've seen jurisprudence coming from court, and it's women who are also making these decisions in favor of men. If you've been following social media, let me deviate from the issue of gender-based violence, and let me just talk about maybe issues to do with children in custody, because that's what we also fight for. You will notice that it is the female judicial officers who are also giving custody to the male parents in this situation. And you see some of these issues, even where men feel deprived in one way or the other, they are as a result of issues to do with custody of children. You will realize a lot of fights, a lot of issues arise from that. But it's the same women in IAWJ-Kenya who say, no, in this particular situation, the man is right. So it does not mean that we have abandoned the men and focused purely on the female. It just means that we are trying to advocate for the rights of the women and the child, because in most situations, they are more vulnerable
to this. Okay, what have we seen in terms of a trajectory, again, on the adjudication of some of these cases and the roles that women judges, magistrates have played in this over time? And I know that in the former administration of Kenya, that we had seen the years 2024, next year, and 2026 marked as years whereby gender-based violence should essentially come to an end. From a judicial point of view, are we actually seeing that? And when we talk about adjudication, are we looking at reform of the individuals who made these other individuals victims? Or are we just seeing that a case is brought before court, this person is either jailed or reprimanded, but then the risk of them being repeat offenders is still very much alive?
Thank you. There are two ways of looking at it. One, legislation may never completely change behavior. And in recognizing that, our association, the International Association of Women Judges, has pushed for several things. One, we recognize that those that have cases in court relating to SGBV, the cases tend to take very long. And when the cases take long, then there's a likelihood of interference with the witness. There's a likelihood of the witness forgetting. And of course, there's always the question of being re-traumatized. And the longer it takes, the worse it is. Our association has actually pushed for survivor-friendly courts. And proudly so that the Chief Justice did launch the first SGBV court in the country in Shanzu, which coincidentally coincided with her push for social transformation through access to justice. And our idea is that these cases should be determined in the fastest way possible, and in an environment that leaves the victim with their dignity intact. Because normally the survivor or victim, as you may say, is made to feel ashamed and made to feel to be the one to carry the blame. And as a result of our push, we've actually, the Chief Justice has set up 10 other courts. But to talk about the escalation of violence, and especially gender-based violence, I'm sure you noticed that during the corona period, it spiked.
Yes.
Many reasons. City asked, what are the reasons why that causes gender-based violence? It is as varied as life is. Part of it is just our socialization. Women are objects, children are objects that you can let out or vent out on. But there are also the economic factors that one feels constrained by certain limitations to let out their frustration. And which object is easier than the vulnerable one? And it is with this in mind that I'm sure you're aware of the 16 days of activism, which we are keenly involved in, because we realize legislation alone cannot change. So we need to reach out. We need to create awareness, and we need to let the people in the country know. So we are roping in this international 16 days that is observed globally to also get to the root people within our communities. And because our association is in all the regions in the country, every region for the next 16 days from 25th of November to 10th of December will be having an activity that will be able to sensitize the people and be able to see whether, because I think leadership is not only about taking the mantle and leading, but it is also inspiring change and allowing people to help in bringing that change. So yes, there has been an escalation, but yes, also there has been great effort by not only our association, but several of our partners and stakeholders to try and reach every person and make them aware of the challenges.
In addition to what the judge has said, I sit in the, do I say the lowest courts? So we interact with these people every single day. The victim and the perpetrator. And getting back to your question about whether we give them also an opportunity to reform, I think that's what you also asked.
Yes.
In most instances, cases of gender violence are between a husband, wife, boyfriend, those kind of relationships in a family setup. And if you look at the Constitution, the family is a basic unit. And one of our responsibility is also to ensure that basic unit remains intact. It's a home. In handling these cases, when victims come before you, sometimes depending on the circumstances, because again, circumstances are as varied as life, the way Judge has put it. So in some situations, you will find even the victim wants to go back to the perpetrator. So you allow the two individuals to speak, because the Constitution also allows us to allow the parties to engage in ADR. If it is a situation where the only thing you can do is to warn, and it has worked, it's something I've seen, Yeah, you sit and, it takes time, it takes patience for you as a judicial officer. You sit with these people. Maybe it's a couple. They have stayed together for 15 years, 20 years. And you see, immediately after maybe assaulting or causing any of the various forms of gender violence, some of the perpetrators are actually sorry. They actually apologize, even in court. Personally, I've seen gifts being given in court and they come back together. While serving in Naivasha, I sat with a couple and, initially the situation was bad because I will not mention names, but I can just give the circumstance of the case where the man of the house assaulted the wife, even took an iron box, hot one, and smashed it on her hand, and she sustained burns. 1 year down the line, the case was in court. I was presiding over it, but the gentleman came and he said he does not know what got over him. That's why we say, sometimes you don't even know what causes that. And through various meetings, various sessions, I refer them to go for counseling so that they can decide, because it's not something that you can also push as a judicial officer. It should come from the parties. They sat down, and despite the gender violence that was experienced in that home, they were back together. 1 year down the line, I found them at Naivas supermarket holding hands. So it does not mean that in every other situation we punish. In certain situations, we allow for the parties involved to sit down and mediate and talk. But there are situations where the situation is so bad that you can no longer even allow the victim back to that particular environment. In such a situation, there's nothing much you can do. You apply the legislation available. Unfortunately, the law is there. It provides for punishment. We apply the law as it is.
As it is.
And maybe just to add on to that, I think recognizing that we need to reach out even to the perpetrator. It is better to get to the problem before it comes up. And what our association is doing is that we have organized various activities targeting groups that we think would have the highest impact. If you visit our prisons, you'll find an age set of between 18 to 30 charged with sexual offenses, which carry very heavy sentences. And so some of the activities that we will be carrying out in the next 16 days actually are targeting communities that we think would be able to have the highest impact, whether it is in the Nyanza region, in the Mount Kenya region, in Rift Valley region. Visiting prisons, yes, to talk to those that are already facing that challenge, but also engaging with communities like the beach management units. They can organize themselves and have one of us sensitize them on sexually and gender-based violence. But even for the women, there is the tendency to keep quiet and feel ashamed about it. So it is also to reach out to them and let them know it is okay to know that you are not going through this alone, and please don't keep quiet. There is help. There is a way that this can be changed. And as she says, it is not all, because sometimes the fear is, but if I go and report this is my husband, he will be put in.
There will be shame.
I have to ask, by the time you get to be a chief magistrate, time you get to be a judge, apart from just the experience, you have, you initially went to school, went to law school, but chances are you've studied a bit more. You even have a judiciary academy. Are there units in the course of your studies where you study counseling, psychological welfare? There's a reason why I ask. If you're constantly in touch with the issues we're dealing with, you will need help at some point. You cannot deal with these matters and you are left unscathed. You will be affected. 1, 2, because of the power of the positions that you hold and the authority therein, would this not be a pivotal point where if one had such training, I'm assuming that it isn't there, and if it's there, it's inadequate, so that you can actually handle these things from a 360 perspective of understanding human nature and how it plays out in some of these circumstances. Just asking.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I will reiterate that being the lowest cadre, we deal with these issues on a daily basis, Monday to Friday, meeting victims, various forms, be it defilement, be it rape, be it assault, all those kind of violence meted on people and on both genders. Looking back at the various units we did, I do not think at any given time I went through any course on counseling. It has been largely a personal initiative, but currently we are so grateful to the Chief Justice that she has appreciated. And sometimes that's why we say, women, sometimes they see far. And
not sometimes women see far. Just
I'm trying to be sensitive. I'm trying to be sensitive.
I am also being very sensitive. They see far as a matter of fact. They actually do.
Yes. And if you look at the stage, one of the key focal points is mental awareness. We're actually coming up now with trainings, not in terms of the one-on-one ones, but they're actually, what is happening now, counselors are being brought in place during our various trainings, and they take us through sessions. Right now, I'm able to even evaluate myself. I'm able to tell when I'm low, when I cannot even handle a case. And the other important thing is I've also been given an opportunity to accept that today I cannot handle this case because I'm so emotionally down. Unlike before, the matter is before you. It does not matter how broken I am. It does not matter how I'm feeling that particular morning. I have to handle it. But in the space that the CJ has given us in the current dispensation of justice, I'm actually allowed to say, can I hear this matter tomorrow when I'm okay? We have now counselors in our medical scheme. I can now walk into a hospital without paying. And we really appreciate the Chief Justice for that. So it's accessible, but not in form of training, but as a service and also as a form of creating awareness.
It's a milestone, but do you have such services within the judiciary? Meaning, I know, for instance, you have a registrar.
Yes.
You even have cashiers.
Yes, City. We do have, we actually have a psychosocial support unit.
Good.
And it has been recommended. I think there's even a task force that's working with the Chief Justice, because it has been recommended that that unit needs to be upped in terms of the manpower, so that you would have someone who would relate well with judicial officers of a certain level, and who will not feel like I am telling my junior staff that would probably make a good novel. So there is actually a psychosocial support unit. But to get back to what you've even asked, we recognize that the trauma is not only for the victim and the victim's family, but it is, and sometimes even the perpetrator's family feel traumatized to think that one of their own would be carrying on in something like this and is now being exposed in the public, but also for the judicial officer. Actually, there have been trainings specifically targeting SGBV and how to handle. And part of the reason why we had so much clamored for the specialized courts was in recognition of the longer it takes, the more traumatized. But that we also need our officers to undergo training so that you are not only sensitive to the person that you are handling, but also sensitive to yourself. Okay. And also to keep reminding us, to disabuse us of certain biases that we have grown up with, that we have been exposed to. So yes, you're right about the trauma. It cuts across, but that is part of why.
You know,
And
yes.
just to add on to that, when you talk of trauma, I can tell you there are days that when you leave court and you cry and you can't sleep. That happens every other time. Maybe as journalists, and we may invite you maybe once in a while.
Why didn't you just invite us?
Yeah, we are inviting you actually in to sit in some of these sessions, because you see, we are here to create awareness, and you may not really appreciate some of these things if you are not directly in contact, so that you feel what happens, the real situation on the ground. If you feel the real situation of the ground on your justice morning sessions, you'll take that responsibility upon yourself, even without us, to speak about some of these things.
On it.
Because we talk about, in terms of curbing, even the GBV issues, when we are here to create awareness, we are here to tell people, please stop it. Because when you look at the repercussions, it affects everybody. Judge has explained it. It affects the perpetrator's family. It affects the court. It affects the victim. So it's not really one person who suffers. It's a whole society.
That
Yes.
does.
And maybe that's why then we have the mentorship program that is really also spearheaded by our association, that those of us who have gone through the ranks and have had instances of interaction may mentor the younger judicial officers in how to handle the situation and handle themselves.
Well.
So mentorship is a big thing for us. Yeah.
You know,
I really
there's
like that.
sorry, go ahead, please.
I really like that, and I think it's also been emphasized in the KJA curriculum that there needs to be a specialized course on gender sensitivity and also SGBV handling. But I'll piggyback to what you said earlier, Judge, which is on the fact that the cases take a bit longer than they should in the court system, and appreciating that the judiciary has put in place active case management. How then do they take that long? Because I would appreciate that the lawyers, the prosecutor, and the magistrate are sitting together and agreeing on how to conduct the case so that it can be dispensed with at the earliest time possible for the sake of the victim, the survivor, but also for the perpetrator, should they be innocent, because at the same time that person is innocent until proven guilty, so that this matter can move as fast as it can through the system. So what is the challenge in terms of hastening the process in court?
The challenge has been, remember that the specialized courts were just launched the other day, and the first one was just in Shanzu about 2 years ago. But the challenge has been that it is not only the SGBV cases that are handled by a judicial officer. Those matters go before a magistrate, and that magistrate has other matters as well. To the Kenyan, every court case is important.
Yes.
So that we would not want to send the wrong message when a litigant or an accused person comes to court and make them feel that your case is less. Because for them, it is a matter of their liberty and their freedom. Which was why then the SGBV courts came up, courtesy of being pushed for by our association. But the challenge has been getting the numbers. You talked about trauma. Having one magistrate hear that kind of case every day, 365 or 280 days in a year, would do something to them.
Heavy toll.
Yeah.
Imagine.
But yet we recognize that there is the flip side of it. The longer it takes, the more traumatic it is for the victim.
Yeah.
So we are pushing for a situation where let's have these specialized courts, but let's also have the numbers so that even the magistrate who would be sitting there, if they sit and have to handle other matters, the matters do not stall. We have numbers so that it moves. We know that there are countries that have tried it and would wish to, probably the Kenyan type and benchmark. Yeah,
Yes.
but it is something that has worked in other jurisdictions. We have court users committees that would help us think through. We have trainings that we are going through and our association has had many of those, to sensitize the judicial officers and the other stakeholders, because it is not just the magistrate sitting to hear those cases. Exactly. Sometimes it's the police file missing, the doctor is who feel the P3 form is not available, there's been interference with the victim, all manner of things contribute towards the delay. Sometimes the advocate has not turned up or has a case somewhere. So there are many factors that can be attributed to this. Sure. But the best would be to get all the stakeholders together so that we are able to push for a more expeditious way of handling. But our starting point would be the specialized courts.
Sure. I mean, the makeup of all of these cases is very important, and the practitioners of that as well, and how they're involved and how they're affected. Looking at what then is the matter of and the stuff of some of these cases, whereby women judges and magistrates then adjudicate over some of these cases. And one thing springs to mind is looking at the age of some of these perpetrators as well as the victims. As you mentioned, the ages of those that we are finding in prison today, between 18 and 30. And comes to mind Justice Odunga and what he recommended at some point when he talked about, look, why are we looking at a minimum sentence of 10 years for anybody who's involved in any kind of case, sexual assault? Now, we know that a child under the age of 18, a child is a child under the age of 18. Somebody who has sex with him or her then is charged with a criminal assault, with a criminal offense, by virtue of the fact that their age. Whether you bring in the aspect of consensual or not, we also say then somebody under the age of 18 is not able to give consent because they're still a child. However, it then, with this Justice Odunga case, then brings in the sensitivity that we speak about, especially when we started this conversation talking about women judges and magistrates. Would that come into play here? Because we have far too many cases of this thing where it is a consensual relationship, but we have young boys a day shy of 18, 2 days after 18, being thrown in prison for something which they honestly did not see as an offense. How are we dealing with that?
That one, I want to applaud our good judge who is before us. She delivered a very good judgment on that. And for me, I have adopted that, and I don't struggle with that. My only duty is to say there's jurisprudence, and one of the things that women judges are doing is to create jurisprudence, and judge has done that. So the issue of Romeo and Juliet, I think it's no longer an issue before us.
What is jurisprudence?
Okay. Jurisprudence is when courts make decisions that give guidance, that resolves issues.
A precedent.
So yes, it's a precedent, rightly put. Yes. You know, when you use precedent and jurisprudence, sometimes those terminologies are hard for the Kenyans to hear. So it's just decisions.
Kenyan, yes.
Yes. We are now talking to the ordinary Kenyans out there.
Yes.
So she came up with a beautiful, beautiful judgment. For me, I call it judgment of the year.
Can you open it up for us a little bit?
The judgment?
Yes.
That is I think it's SOPO 1 of 2017.
Right.
Yes.
Speak to it if you can.
If you would,
yes,
please.
I would speak to it. And this is a very unfortunate situation where, especially in the rural setup, first of all, currently, 22 is the new 18. The level of maturity shifted, but the ages remain.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, in the rural setup, you find a young man who has gone through primary school and is unable to pursue their education beyond that. And the easiest thing is either to become a border rider or a fisherman. And those trades have money in their context.
Yes.
And after a while, the young man's mother will be asking him, with all this money, why are you cooking for yourself?
Should have a wife.
Now,
Surely.
you tell me, if my 17-year-old son brings home a 30-year-old, I'll pass out.
Surely.
He's been bewitched. Well, who will he look for? Someone younger than him. Yeah?
Of course.
So it is that kind of Romeo. And you know, in the village, girlfriend, boyfriend is actually husband, wife.
Yes,
you
it
know,
is.
if you even try to woo the other person's girlfriend, they'll tell you, wachana na huyo ni bibi ya fulani, right? So when you have that kind of situation, how then can we help this young generation? Because the law remains what you've said, 18 is 18. For the Romeo and Juliet, 17 and 15, there's no consent. These are children who actually need guidance,
Yes.
right? And they should probably be taken through some counseling. But because the law is the law, and because 21 is actually the new 18, 25 is actually the new 20, then we must reach out to them. We must reach out to them in the schools, in the areas where we find these certain age ranges, and be able to tell them, below 18, there's no consent. And girls have also become aggressive. It is a matter of fact. We must reach out to the girls and explain to them, when you throw yourself at someone, when you blackmail, and this generation, blackmail is a big thing. Or if you don't want to sleep with me, I'll go to the next person.
Yes.
So we have to reach to both the boys and girls. And just, first of all, sensitize them on the fact that below 18, there's no question of consent. But that will be hogwash unless you tell them of the consequences. And the consequences are dire. That by the time you are proving you are 17 and not 18, you've been in the system, you've been in remand, you have gone through the works, then you have to go for age assessment. And just depending on your physical makeup, you may be 17, but you look like 25.
Indeed.
So that once you come to court and you're telling me you're 17, I'll not buy that. I'll say that you should go for age assessment. So all that traumatizes a young person. So why not reduce this traumatization by sensitizing them at the earliest, by going to the schools, by mentoring them and empowering them, so that we reduce that. But yes, the Sexual Offences Act is a very harsh legislation,
Yes.
and we would want to have a lot of discussion around it. I think the NCAJ committee is already working around looking at the Sexual Offences Act,
Yes.
and making certain recommendations. So I will not go into that because I'm not in that committee, and we have a representative in that committee.
You do know that the judicial system is lagging behind the health system. Because of HIV, this very thing we're discussing, the moment a young person was HIV positive, especially a young lady, had a child, you now became a mature minor. And you were managed and treated like a mature person. And why? As you mentioned, the lived experience was this person as a child.
So they cannot be a child.
You're not going to, yes, the details in this particular matter, you park it aside. And then the issue of children, because of HIV, where you find households being led by grandmothers or 17-year-olds. I know of instances where you have a 17-year-old with 3 wives, and they're all younger than him.
Yeah.
Okay. And they have children. So now, again, it's in a rural setting. Again, the fellow's a fisherman. So you look at the law and you look at the lived reality, and you're saying the law is being left behind here a little bit. And this person is going to be disadvantaged because these are special circumstances, and he's not the only one. And the law doesn't cater for this because it's circumstances that has forced this 17-year-old to be the head of the household. He did not want his parents to die. True.
And I think also on the flip side, in the urban setting right now, because of the infiltration of technology, people being on social media, people are getting girlfriends and boyfriends earlier. This new generation of people are very mature for their age, way beyond their age. So you'll find that they're engaging in conduct that is adult conduct. So yes, you have the dynamics in the rural setting. You also have the urban dynamics in the urban setting because of technology being westernized, being cultured in a bad way, I would imagine, because some of these things were a preview of when you get married, but now I think everyone is doing it, so why not? So how then do we ensure that the criminal justice system does not criminalize everyone under a certain age, and as such there will be no one within a certain bracket, because we are all in the criminal justice system, for having engaged in conduct that everyone else was engaging in? I am not promoting it. I'm just saying it is the lived reality that we are in.
True. You want to go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay. What you're saying is true. And happily for us, we are actually working with several development partners. And in fact, next week we will be having a meeting, a 2-day meeting, just to sensitize and have discussions around SGBV technology and the digital world. And among our partners are IDLO and Equality Now, because we recognize that what City is saying, we are lagging behind. There are those opportunities, there are those spaces that if we shut our eyes to, we will be singing to the birds. Yeah. So you're quite right. But we recognize that, and happily again, our development partners realize the critical role that sensitizing judicial officers in a structured manner really is needed, and have roped us in. Yeah.
And, look, what I think, even as we wrap up this conversation, it's encouraging that what would have been seen as a rigid system is actually thinking and seeing the reality on the ground, and then being able to adjudicate with that information in mind. And I think it's exciting to see that that can actually happen, then moving on into the future, and then we start to see, an open system. Really,
does it not lend itself to what we're now seeing as a lived reality, that having a female Chief Justice is an enormous advantage to the judicial system?
Definitely.
Oh, yes.
It is.
Definitely.
Our guests this morning have been Honorable Lady Justice Hellen Omondi, who is Judge of the Court of Appeal and the President of the International Association of Women Judges, as well as Honorable Renee Kitagwa, who is a Principal Magistrate at the JKIA Law Court. Thank you for being here this morning, and these conversations indeed must continue. Until the next time, thank you so much for being here today.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.